What up, and welcome back to World Heavyweights live on WorldSports.com. I'm Easy at Spinmo Rex. We got young Chris, Nicholas Koloff, and of course, as promised, we are joined by the one and only of the Athletic official Detroit Red Wings beat reporter, Max Bultman. What up, man? Appreciate you joining us.
Hey, fellas, my pleasure. How you doing?
Still grieving a little bit.
Yeah, still working on it. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, it certainly has been a wild ride to the finish here, and it was as entertaining a stretch of hockey as I have seen in Detroit in my time on the beat, which started pretty much when the bottom out was happening in 2018. So I think it was a really fun ride, and I think there's certainly a lot to write about now going forward into the offseason.
And I'm gonna start with some great stuff, with some happy stuff to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, because we saw Lucas Raymond become him this year. Like, he took that leap where he led the team in goals. He's out there making plays. He's scoring the big goals in the biggest moments on the season, other than David Perron. But when you look at what he became this year after kind of a step back in his sophomore season, is this what we expect Lucas Raymond to be going forward now, is to be that one winger on this team that's going to snipe the puck in the back of the net?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, the goal scoring is great. You look at the shooting percentage and maybe you say, okay, is that a little bit higher than is fair to expect? But I think he's also going to shoot the puck a lot more going forward. I think that was the biggest takeaway down the stretch, is this guy became a go-to guy. And that's what the Red Wings needed him to be. They needed him to not just be a skill player who could, make the play when it's easy. They needed him to be a guy who could get to the net and score the hard goal when the games matter the most. That's the most impressive thing I'm going to take away. Obviously, Dylan Larkin's still going to be a huge driver of this team. I think he ends the year with 33 goals, Larkin does, which edges out Raymond. But I think by next year, you could see Raymond pushing him there. He already led the team in overall points this year, like you said, partly because Larkin was injured. So I think going forward, that's your 1-2 punch up top. And that's a big development, right? Like, especially for him, to the way he did it, to round out his game, to get more physical. These are the kind of things the Red Wings absolutely needed to see from Lucas Raymond this year. And they did. And that's one of the reasons they were really happy to play these meaningful late season games, is you just don't know what a guy's going to look like in those situations until he's there. Now we do with Lucas Raymond.
And looking at it, he helped himself, because he is in a contract year now. So that's got to be one of the priority number ones for the Red Wings, is to re-sign Lucas Raymond. I put it out there that I would like to see like 8 and 8 if they can get that done. 8 years, $8 million a pop. What's your realistic contract evaluation for a guy like Lucas Raymond?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think you're in the right ballpark there, right? The question is on the term. Can you get him for 8 years? And if you can do it at $8 million, I think you do that, right? Like, I think the comp there would be like the Jack Hughes contract. Mm-hmm. The other ones that they're going to look at, Tim Stützle got 8.3 something at 8 years in Ottawa, same draft class, really high production in his own right. He's a center. I think kind of the ballpark, though, is right around what you're talking about on an 8-year deal. They may not be able to do an 8-year deal. Maybe it's 6 years, 7 years, and that drops the AAB a little bit. But I think if I'm the Red Wings, I'm trying to lock this guy up as long as possible, because I don't think the point totals are going down for Lucas Raymond. I think they're just going to keep going up, and I'd want him locked in at a number as soon as possible.
Yeah, speaking about locking guys in, you also got Seider. Maybe you want to bring back Kane. I guess, what are some of your predictions for these contracts this upcoming season in terms of guys who are going to come back?
Seider is going to be a fascinating one, because coming into the season, I thought there's a chance this guy is going to get into the Dylan Larkin territory with his contract. That's how important he is to this team as their number one defenseman. But you often see guys kind of get paid by points. And while there are some big deals that have been handed out to young defensemen who have, and part of, the reason I thought that was because of these young deals that got handed out to guys like Owen Power, Jake Sanderson, that are at and above $8 million. Already, despite the fact that they hadn't produced anything more than Seider had. But and Seider still produced plenty this year. He scores a big goal last night, but he's not producing in like the Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes territory necessarily either. That makes me think he's going to get that like 8.5, 8.7. It's still possible. He plays that kind of role, and I think he led the NHL in block shots. I don't know exactly how that finished out, but he was in first as of like a week ago. He plays a huge role, but typically you see guys get paid by points. And this contract I'm really fascinated by. I don't know if the Red Wings will go the full 8 years like I thought they would at the start of the year. I think it's still possible. I think there's still very good reason to. It wouldn't shock me as much anymore as it would have at one time if they decided to do a bridge and then see where it's at. But I think he's a core foundational piece. And in one way or another, Moritz Seider is going to be a Detroit Red Wing for a really long time. But I'm fascinated to see where this contract ends up.
And before we get into the stuff about last night and down the stretch, one more question for the future. I kind of put out an emotional tweet last night about guys that I want to see on this team next year, and I put pictures of Kasper, Kosa, and Johansson in that tweet. And I know they're probably going to keep Kosa in Grand Rapids for a majority of next year just to give him a full year down there. But Marco Kasper, even Danielson, who is one of the best in the early prospect camp. Which one of these prospects or multiple prospects could you see cracking the big league club for the Red Wings next year?
I think by the end of the year, it could be multiple, right? Johansson's out of waiver exemption, so I do think he pretty much has to make the roster unless they're going to move him. I think he would get claimed on waivers quite quickly. So I think you're going to get your wish there. What does that mean in terms of a role? Time will tell, but I think it's a guy they like, and I don't think it's a guy that they want to lose for nothing. Kasper's a little more interesting. I could see them kind of going the slower play route with him just because he hasn't had that like crazy offensive production that usually tells you a guy's outgrown the league, but he did really come on and find his game in the second half of the year. He's a really hard worker. If he continues to push, I could see him making a case. And he's also has some of the elements that they lack at the NHL level right now, right? Like he has that mean to him, that jam, that, not afraid of anybody. Those are all things the Red Wings lack at times this year, and winning those battles down low. I think he would help them with that. So I think there is a case, and similar case for another guy, Carter Mazur, who's down there a little bit older. I actually wouldn't be shocked if he was the first forward of the bunch to get a crack. He's a little skinny. That's kind of the one drawback for how physical and hard he plays. You kind of worry, can he do that? If he doesn't add, 10, 15 more pounds onto that frame. But he's got a versatile game, and he's a guy I could see. Danielson is going to be fascinating, though. Like, Danielson looked awesome this preseason.
Yeah, he did. And
if you're just extrapolating off that, you say, is he your favorite of all the young prospects to make a run at this team next year? My only question is, it's harder when there's actual pressure on you, an actual kind of possibility that you could make the team. I think it's a little easier to go out with no expectations and do what Danielson did and surprise everybody, maybe including yourself. Next year, there's going to be a lot of eyes on him and a lot of people asking exactly what you're asking right now, which is this guy going to be on the team? And I think that's a test for young guys to see how they perform in those situations. Guys like Raymond and Seider passed that test, and they made the team, even with all those eyes on him. But sometimes it goes the other way too. So I think it's possible that you see. So we just mentioned four guys: Johansson, Kasper, Mazur, and Danielson. I think it's possible that by the end of the year, you've seen all four of them in a Red Wings jersey next year. I don't think you'll get all four for the full season, though. I think you'll probably get one or two at the beginning, and then as the year goes on, I think you'll see at least one of the other two, and maybe both.
It's so crazy because, like, I find people questioning Steve Yzerman's process or the plan, the Yzer plan, if you will. But, like, to sit here and talk about, like, all these prospects, we have kind of just waiting. And they were all, like, fairly confident. And, like, I don't remember those ever being conversations with, like, the prospect pool. I guess I just don't really understand, like, where are you at with, like, the Yzer plan? Do you think it's hit a bump in the road, or this is kind of like as he's planned it out? Because I remember specifically drafting night, he's made comments, even at the deadline, about not expecting the playoffs, but, like, wanting to be there.
It's a complicated question, right? I think they're in an interesting place here because they've now kind of taken that step that they're right there on the cusp, and that is going to come with expectations. And I don't know that they still are at that place where you can see, okay, they're going to take this much of a step next year and become that 105 point team that isn't sweating at all down the stretch. I don't know if I see that for them next year, obviously pending whatever they do this summer. If they go out and they make a couple big additions, the right guy in goal kind of thing, that can change. But I think slow and steady, they are making progress. And I think you have to acknowledge that. Is it as fast as anybody would like? I would have to say no. And I think you can point to the farm system even. And while they have a lot of prospects, how many more do they have that project as real, true stars, right? I think Edvinsson is kind of the guy right now that I can see being a star. And beyond that, I think you got a lot of good prospects and maybe some really good prospects. But do you have any more stars in there? And I think they could use another star or two. Kosa would be a huge one. If that happens to be him, there's no better position to have a star than in goal, right? Like that's the position that can really elevate you. Is he that? I guess we're going to find out. But that I think is the crux of where things are at with the broader rebuild is, did you manage to get in these years where you were at the bottom? Did you manage to find the true drivers of a championship team? Or did you manage to get a bunch of good players, but you're still looking for those 1 or 2 stars? I don't have the answer to that question. I don't think anybody has the answer to that question right now. And that's what we're going to find out in the next year or two.
Yeah, and now getting into some of the tougher stuff about how the season ended and how the season finished. And, it was Bettman hockey at its finest, to where it goes down to game 82 and you got 4 teams that are all trying to get in still. And you got teams with less wins than other teams in the playoffs. And what do you think would be the one thing, if you had to boil it down to one thing, for the Red Wings and why they didn't make the playoffs? For me, it was consistent upper echelon goaltending. Like, you didn't have that one guy. Lyon had it for a while, and that's when we were the hottest team in the league, and then he kind of went back to earth and we fell off a little bit. What's the one piece for you to say that this is why? I know it's hard to just nail it down on one thing, but this is why the Wings didn't make the playoffs.
Can I just put it to the month of March? So here's the thing with the goalie. I agree with you that this is a team that needs like above average, at least, goaltending to succeed.
Yeah.
But what I think that tells you is that there is something that you're asking goaltending to cover up. And for me, I think that's the team defense. It's not just the defensemen, it's the team defense. They were giving up way too much for way too long. It came to a head in March when they lost Dylan Larkin, and teams could really pick their matchups with them and just torment them in a way with how many, mismatches they could create, especially when those games were on the road for the Red Wings. That's when it all heightened. And I get that you're without Larkin. I get that there was a flu bug that was going around the team. I think that those were both factors. But at the end of the day, you got to find a way to win 2 or 3 of those games without Dylan Larkin. If you go and look at their record with and without Larkin, they're 100-point pace with Larkin, and they're on pace with the San Jose Sharks without him. Yes, that speaks to how good and how valuable Dylan Larkin is. It also is just really not acceptable. A team should not be that dependent on one guy to have that level of swing. And so I think the way that they, and most of that record, by the way, is in the month of March, right? Like, that's when he missed, I think it was 8 games that he was out, and he missed 14 on the season. So that month of March was where you lost it. You get 1 more point in that stretch. You can even lose the game. You just take one of those games to overtime. I think about the game in Vegas where they played so well and they lost it and they didn't get a regulation point. You just take that game to overtime. And we're talking about a playoff series in New York this weekend, guys. Like, that's how important that was. And they couldn't find that 1 point without Larkin in that stretch. Obviously they did pick up a couple wins over Buffalo and Columbus, teams you got to beat, right? And there's more that they left on the table. They didn't get a single point on the Arizona Coyotes in that stretch. That's where you miss the playoffs. If you want to boil it down to one thing, it's that you couldn't find a way without Larkin in March. And I think that speaks to a team that, while deeper this year, was not deep in one of the ways that counts, which is being able to match up and being able to check.
Now, I know you have the player exit interviews. Is that later today still?
Later this week. Still waiting on kind of certain particulars. Not today, though. Later this week, I think, is the expectation.
What is your, guess for what's going to happen with Patrick Kane moving forward? We kind of talked about those young guys, but the Showtime, the wily old vet, expect him to return, or you think he's going to cash in on a trophy somewhere?
Well, it's the thing I'm most curious to hear him talk about whenever we do those exit interviews. My gut feeling, and I don't have anything from Patrick to back this up, right? This is kind of my gut feeling, is that I think it makes sense for him to come back. And I think he seemed to enjoy it here. He was certainly successful here. I know when he signed, he talked about how important it was for him to play in a market that loves hockey. He certainly saw up close just how much, Detroit gets into its team when its team is in it. And even honestly, sometimes when the team is not in it. This is a loyal, dedicated, passionate fan base that appreciates what Patrick Kane brings to the ice in terms of his play and in terms of his showmanship. So I think there's a lot of reasons for Patrick Kane to come back. One of them is Alex DeBrincat, close friend of his. But I think if I had to guess that he would come back. But the Red Wings did fall apart kind of down the stretch. And I think it's possible that he decides, hey, I'm going to go try it somewhere else. But my gut feeling as we sit here today, again, having not done the exit interview yet where all this is talked about, I think he'll be back, but we'll see.
I love it. And I can only hope for that. And then another thing I got to ask you is about the head coach. We got a lot of people in the chat, a lot of people on Twitter calling for Derek Lalonde, saying get him out of here. Where do you sit with Newsy? How you feeling about his progression? And they improved. Like, I understand missing the playoffs is bad, but this is an 11-point jump from last year. Yep. Almost twice as many players with double-digit goals. Like, How do you feel about Newsy and his job security going forward?
Yeah, I'm with you. They jumped 11 points. I think if they had really collapsed down the stretch, like the very end there when they were still in it and they hadn't shown the fight, maybe that's a conversation you could have. Even then, it's still just year 2, and they were gonna make a incremental improvement. Now it's an 11-point improvement. You don't get that many 11-point improvements in the NHL without being like a 45, 50-point team at least, right? Like it is hard to make real jumps in this league, and they did it. So I think it's still trending up. He's still got plenty to prove, right? They still have to get beyond just improving at some point. And I think next year the expectations do go up, even if the job may get tougher, because as we talked about, there may be some younger guys in the lineup next season. Spending more money on your Seiders and your Raymonds means you have less to spread around to other supplementary veterans. So maybe a tougher task next year, but that's the job, right? And I think expectations will go up. I think next year, I do expect Derek Lalonde to be back, and I think next year you'll see if they can take one more step.
Max, I appreciate you taking the time to join us, man. I got one more from my guy Nick in the sound booth, and then I'll let you get going. I apologize.
Hey, Max. Simon Edvinsson played in 16 games this season. What would you grade him on those games? Because we know he's going to be such a pivotal piece in the future.
I give him an A. I mean, there's a couple turnovers in there that I'm sure he wants back, but I thought he handled the pressure of playoff-like hockey better than I even expected. And I'm a big Simon Edvinsson believer. I have been back to his draft selection. I think those long, rangy D like him are so hard to come by. And this one just so happens to have a bunch of offense to his game as well. You saw that on the goal in Toronto. I don't even think you saw the full complement of it, though. I think he's going to wow some people at points with what he can do activating off the blue line. And what impressed me, honestly, was that he did have the poise to know when to do that and more specifically, when not to do that in this playoff race, what risks not to take. I was not sure how that would go for him. And if I'm guessing, that's probably one of the reasons why he spent so much of this year in Grand Rapids, was they just wanted to know, about his kind of risk reward calculations. I thought he passed that test with flying colors down this playoff stretch. He played a top 4 role for this team in a playoff hunt. I have no reason to believe he won't be playing a top 4 role for him next year. And I think he'll do really well in that capacity.
And Max, before we let you go, I do have to ask this because these guys, they fought me on it every time I say it. And we talk about the young studs that we got in the prospect pool. One of them that I am probably the biggest fan out of all of them is ASP and what he can do and what he brings to the game. And I said he is Makar-ish. I didn't say he's Cale Makar. I said he's Makar-ish, the way he plays and what he can do offensively.
You can call him crazy
as well.
if you want, Max.
How do you feel about that?
I think that's a little hot for me. I think he's a really good player, though. Makar's 101, right? Like what I think with Pellikka is that I think you want to see him become like a Brandon Montour. And I don't like Brandon Montour is awesome. Brandon Montour is a huge piece on a team that went to the Stanley Cup final last year. And I think with a guy like Pellikka, if you compare him to a Makar and to a Quinn Hughes, it almost sets an impossible bar for this guy, right? I want to see a guy who can score big goals, who's poised with the puck, and who also can handle his own end, handle business in his own end at a level enough that you can play him the kind of role that's going to let him stack up those points. I think that's totally possible for him. So I think Brandon Montour should be the target. Hey, if he's Cale Makar, everyone in Detroit will love it. But I don't see that path necessarily. I think, if he can become a solid 20-minute-a-night top 4 defenseman who scores big goals, that's a hugely successful pick, and I think that's what he has the potential to be.
Max, appreciate your time, man. I read your heartbreak piece a little bit earlier. Thanks for making me feel that again. Make sure you guys check that out on The Athletic. Anything else you want to plug in before we let you get going?
No, we'll have a bunch of off-season content. So I've got a story coming tomorrow that'll talk about, obviously, like we talked about the season's progress. What does that mean? Was it a success? That's kind of the premise of tomorrow's article. So we'll do that, and then we'll have all kinds of stuff coming off the exit interviews and going into the off-season. So hope people will stick around, let their mind stick on hockey for just a little bit longer. Tied you over to the NFL draft.
Yes. That's at @M_Bultman. Make sure you guys give him a follow on X and keep an eye out for his new articles. Thanks for joining us, man.
Appreciate you, Max.
Anytime, guys. Talk to you soon.
See you later,
brother. That was a great interview.
It's a great interview.
Definitely get him back.
Great stuff. Definitely got to bring him. The man knows his stuff.
Yeah, he knows so much.
Like I say it every time. The guys at The Athletic, man,
they're top tier.
They are top tier. And Max is one of, if not the best hockey minds in Detroit right now. It's awesome to have him on.